we're going to continue, and Tim and Danny have actually given me some good fodder as we continue in our series about sharing Jesus without freaking out. We're going through this book and the principles in this book, and we've shared with you, and by the way, thank you to both Mike and Jake for taking the reins while I was gone. They did fantastic. And on the back, give them a round of applause. On the back of your sheet this morning is a reminder of how far we've come. So we're talking about some of the principles we've gone through. Principle number 1 is that you have everything that you need to begin sharing Jesus with other people right now. In fact, everything that Tim and Danny just shared, you could probably do in your own community. So if there's anything, you don't have to wait for some special training or a special class to take. You have what you need to begin sharing Jesus right now. Number 2, and this is what Mike shared, you don't have to prove the claims of Christianity. Just present them clearly and let God do the rest of it, right? And then principle number 3, which Jake shared last week, gospel conversations are better for everyone. We're not trying to have an argument or a disagreement with somebody. We just want to begin to build some conversation. And then what we're going to talk about today is context, and how every context is an opportunity to share the joy of the gospel with the people around you. So let's talk about the importance of context, okay? And this is important because I think one of the things that is a challenge for us in sharing our faith is trying to understand how we do that in the places we live, work, and play. Right? Because we have these fears about what people think and what they're going to do with us. But really, context begins to put that into its proper perspective. So let me share with you a little bit. If I were in this room this morning, if I just stood up and yelled fire and there was no fire, how would you respond to that? You'd say I was crazy?
I'd smack you in the head.
Smack you in the head. There we go. There's some truth, right? At the end of it, you'd be upset, right? Why would you, especially if you believed me, right? And I did it in a convincing way, and you all got outside, and I said, just kidding. No fire, right? You'd be upset. Pastor, what is wrong with you, right? But let's say there was a fire. There was a fire in the back of the room. The whole bookcase instantaneously lit on fire. And then I shouted fire. How would you feel then?
Glad you yelled.
Yeah, glad you yelled. And we get outside and the whole place is engulfed and everybody's life has been saved. And you would all throw me a party and be so happy. And say, Pastor, we love you so much. Thank you, right? What's the difference between those two scenarios? Context, right? In the first case, I yelled fire, but there was no fire. In the second, I yelled fire, and there was fire. Context makes all the difference in communication when we're talking with one another. Now, when we talk about language, that becomes very clear. The English language, and one of the things I love about, by the way, if you're feeling a call to England, one of the things I love about the UK, I don't know if you know this, but they speak English. Now, they don't speak American, they speak English, okay? So you can actually understand them. You don't have to go through a big language program. There's some cultural differences, but you can understand language. I don't know if you know this, but the English language is a mess. Let me give you an example. The word bat in English, okay? What does that word mean? The answer is, it depends, right? So if I'm talking about baseball, what's a bat? It still depends, right? Because you can either be talking about the instrument you use, or you can be talking about the action of batting. See how dumb the English language is? All right, how about if I give you the context of within the animal kingdom? What's bat mean? Yeah, flying rodent, right? Very different than in the sport analogy. How about in humans? What does bat mean? There's a couple of things, right? First of all, that old bat, right? Secondly, what can you do with your eyelashes? You can bat your eyelashes. One word has all these different meanings, and how do we know the difference? Context. It's how are we using a particular word, and what is its context? Just as a side note, I went to look it up. The word set in English is the word with the most number of meanings. It has 430 meanings in the English language. That is crazy. So, back to the point. Okay, that was a quick side note. You didn't even have to pay for that. Context is absolutely critical when we're talking about communication. And on page 54 of our book, they say this: evangelism is learning to get both parties who are having a conversation about Christ in the same place, understanding language about the gospel in the same way, so that true communication can happen. By knowing your context, you can help your listeners know the gospel. So now we're not just talking about language, we're talking about putting the gospel into the context of whoever you're talking to. Now, when we talk about going and doing international missions, we understand this, right? If you're going to Romania, what should you first do before you share the gospel at all? Understand the culture so that you can know how to share the gospel within that particular context. Tim just said it. How long have they been in the UK trying to understand the context of sharing the gospel in the UK? How long? 2 years. And so they're just, I got to tell you, when I heard that, first time I heard that, I was like, but it's the UK, they're just like us. No, they're not. Even in our own communities, there are different contexts, right? How I would speak to someone in Elizabeth or Kiowa is very different than how I would speak to someone in Commerce City, right? Or downtown Denver. They're completely different contexts, and we need to understand that. And Paul understood this. So I want you to grab your Bibles and turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 9. 1 Corinthians chapter 9, starting in verse 19. While you getting there, I'm going to take a drink. Paul says, even though I am a free man with no master, I have become a slave to all people to bring many to Christ. Now listen to his context. When I was with the Jews, I lived like a Jew to bring the Jews to Christ. When I was with those who followed the Jewish law, I too lived under that law, even though I am not subject to the law. I did this so that I could bring to Christ those who are under the law. Okay, so when he's with the Jews, how did he act? How did he live? Like a Jew. He understood their context. He lived his life within that context for one purpose. And what was that one purpose? To bring them to Christ, to share the gospel with them, so that they would have something in common and he could share the gospel within their context. Did he try and just change their context? No. He wanted to understand their context and live within that context. He says, and when I'm with Gentiles who do not follow the Jewish law, I too live apart from that law so that I can bring them to Christ. But I do not ignore the law of God. I obey the law of Christ. When I am with those who are weak, I share their weakness, for I want to bring the weak to Christ. Yes, I try to find common ground with everyone, doing everything I can to save some. I do everything to spread the good news, the gospel, and share its blessings. When he was with the Jews, he lived like a Jew. When he was with the Gentiles, he lived like a Gentile. This is hard for us Americans. I don't know if you know this. It's hard for us Americans to do. Because we're Americans and the way we do things is just right. Right? Not always. Some of the things we do are great. Some of the things we do make no sense, and other people, other cultures, this is one of the shocking things about going on a mission trip. You find out that other cultures do things, and you wonder, why don't we do that? Why don't we do some of the things that they do? And then some of the things we do, I'm like, man, I need to take that over there because it's way better than what they do. But so when you're living in the United Kingdom, who do you try to live like? The people that live there. Not the loud, boisterous American who has all the answers. When you go to Romania, how should you live? Like a Romanian, and understand their culture and understand. That's what Paul did with the singular goal of doing what? Bringing people to Christ. He says, I find common ground. Other versions say, I become all things to all people to win some. We look at that. Our American mindset says, no, I'm not going to become anything other than what I am because I'm an American. Right? And as Christ followers, we got to get over that. And say, even though I'm free, I'm going to become a slave to people who don't know Jesus so that they can know Jesus. That has to become our goal, our mentality, our heart. Which brings us to today's principle number 4. Every context is an opportunity to share the joy of the gospel with others. I want to share one more quote with you out of the book. It says, evangelism means learning to listen for cultural clues in your conversation with others to discern what elements of God's grand narrative they're most ready, able to hear and understand. You remember last Sunday, if you were here, Jake asked a question. He asked, how many people in the room got saved by listening or reading a gospel tract? You know how many people in the room raised their hands? 1. Now, does that mean gospel tracts are ineffective and we shouldn't be learning them, or we shouldn't learn the Romans Road, or we shouldn't do any of those things? No. It just means you have to understand the context in which it would be valid versus most of the contexts that we live in. And so we're going to talk a little bit about understanding your culture to share the gospel in the cultures in which you live. And so when you start sharing the gospel with people, you need to understand the context and culture of that particular person. Now, I'm going to give you some good news. In most cases, you're going to share the gospel in a culture that you already understand. Isn't that good news? Yes. You don't have to go to school. You already understand. When I say this is our American culture, you know what I mean. When I say this is the culture of people who live in Elizabeth, you know what I mean. It means they have goats, and they have chickens, and they have guns. Right? And they're happy about it. Good luck taking any of them away. And when I say, here's the culture of downtown Denver, it means they have no goats, no chicken eggs, no guns, and they don't want them. One of the mistakes we make is we say, well, I'm from Elizabeth, so I'm going to go into downtown Denver, and I'm going to convert them to carry guns and have chickens. First of all, no, you're not. And second of all, that's not even the point. The point is, can you share Jesus in their culture with who they are? Even the people in this room have different cultures, right? So how many boomers do I have in the room? Raise your hand. All right. How many Gen Xers do we have? Here's my people. How many millennials do we have? See, you guys even skipped a letter. We don't call you Y. We got millennials, right? How many Gen Zers do we have in the room? All right. Any Generation Alpha? Any Alphas in the room? No, we dismissed them all. Oh, we got one, right? Here's the thing. Sharing the gospel with each one of those different culture groups is different. One of the reasons you can use a gospel tract to share the gospel with a boomer is because a boomer already accepts and acknowledges that they are broken, sinful people. You don't have to convince them of that. They know it. Gen Zers, not so much. They think they are all that in a bag of chips. Gen Xers came along and said, prove it, show me. I don't think I am. And so each culture, you have to understand the culture that you're working with. If you take a gospel tract to a Gen Zer, you're already talking the wrong language. Because you're saying you're a sinner, and they're saying, no, I'm not. Prove it. Right? So we got to understand the context of the people that you're talking to. So, you know, when we get to, again, when we talk about going to Romania or to the UK, we understand this, right? Someone asked me this morning, what was the culture in Romania? And I don't even know how to answer the question. Because what I experienced over a week was, here's the biggest thing I understand. People in Bucharest drive like crazy people. It's insane. And I've been to Cambodia. I felt safer driving in Cambodia than I did in Bucharest. Let me give you an example. And first of all, for us here in the U.S., a roundabout here, we have no idea what a roundabout is. They had a roundabout that had 4 lanes. Okay?
They weren't even lanes.
Yeah, they weren't even really lanes, but lanes. Okay? Now, through the middle of that roundabout, coming this way, was a tram. And then you could go around the roundabout, or in special circumstances, I don't know what they are, you could drive through the middle of the roundabout. Now, we Americans can't figure out how to do one roundabout with 2 lanes. You know that one out by the hospital? I almost got killed there. Because we were traversing like this, right? I'm on the inside and this person's on the outside, and I needed to go around and go out here. Well, this lane was supposed to go out here, and he just cut me off. I might have said some bad words underneath my breath. We don't understand it. What is the culture in Romania? I don't know. I've been there for a week. I don't understand that culture. But you know what culture I do understand? This culture. I know that today is Championship Sunday.
Go Eagles!
I know that in 2 weeks is Super Bowl Sunday. And if we tried to do church during the Super Bowl, it would be me and maybe my wife. Actually, to be fair, it would be my wife. I'd be like, no one's going to be there, right? That's our culture. I understand our culture. You understand your culture. So here are 3 ways to better understand gospel context in your culture. Number 1 is to start with your cultural context. What is the culture that you live in? You know it. You don't need to study it. And by the way, we all have different language depending on what culture we live in. Get to that here in a second. Here's the good news. Most of the people you know and are going to share the gospel with live in your culture. So you have a leg up on even Tim and Danny, who are trying to share the gospel in the United Kingdom. We're asking you to share the gospel with your neighbor. So if you live in Elizabeth and that is your cultural context, there's a way for you to share the gospel in that cultural context. And you don't need to figure out how to share the gospel in Commerce City. You need to figure out, how do I share the gospel with my neighbor? Maybe you just need to buy them a goat. I don't know. Buy them a chicken. I guarantee you, if I showed up to my neighbor with a chicken tomorrow, I've lost all connection with that neighbor. Well, maybe not right now, because you can't find eggs anywhere. So maybe right now they'd be excited about it, right? Understand your cultural context. Let me ask you this. When I say American culture, what does that mean? What are some things that means? Individualistic. It's all about me. Okay? What else? Instant gratification, right? If Amazon takes more than 1 day now to get me a package, I'm upset. You think I'm kidding? I'm upset. I'll find somewhere else to get it then. Fine. Except I'm not going to drive down to Best Buy to get it, because that's today, but that would mean I have to get out of my couch, right? And I don't want to do that, right? What else does it mean? What? Fast food. By the way, You want a burger? America's the place to get a burger. Rest of the world hadn't figured it out, okay? They're trying, but it's not the same. That's one of the things I would take, all right? UK does fish and chips. They've ruined fish and chips for me, by the way. All right, what else?
American dream.
The American dream. That's even changed. All right, what is the American dream? Yeah, you can be anything that you want. No, you can't. But I get the premise, right? All right, what else? What's that? Prosperity. Yeah, we got money. We got stuff. How about this? Let me share with you a little bit what it means on the spiritual side of things. We are quickly becoming a post-Christian culture. Which means we've got to change how we go about sharing the gospel. Our communities no longer accept that Christianity is the baseline of who we are. They don't even accept or believe that it's good that America was founded on those principles anymore. Now, we can rail against the fact that that's changed, but the question is, how do we change it back? Is by sharing the gospel.
That's
Right?
Yes.
We can be all upset about it and be angry with our politicians and say that's not what our forefathers foresaw. By the way, our forefathers were not all that perfect either. Yes, things have changed, but God has not changed. The gospel has not changed. The need for the gospel has not changed. It just means we have to communicate it differently within our cultures. You can no longer assume that your neighbor had a Christian upbringing or background, which is one of the things the boomers are lamenting. Because in their culture, that's exactly how things were. But that's changed. So we have to change and adapt with it. All right, so you just need to start within your cultural context. The second thing you need to do is you need to know yourself. What makes you unique? What makes you, I can say it a different way, what makes you so special? But the answer is, what does make you special? And there's all kinds of different things that you can consider. Like, are you first in, where's number 2? Did you fall asleep? Here's number 2. There you go. Know yourself. See, I could tell people were freaking out about the blank, right? That's the other thing about American culture. If you got a blank, you better tell me how to fill that blank in, right? All right, so you got to know yourself. What makes you unique? And there's all kinds of different ways. Like, what is your generation? Are you Gen Z? Are you millennial? Are you a boomer? Are you Gen X? What is your child order? Were you firstborn, secondborn, thirdborn, single? You didn't have siblings? By the way, those things matter. Because us firstborns, we run the world, baby. All right. We paved the way for you second and thirdborns. We're not being mean, it's not bullying, it's leadership skills. Okay? And by the way, you ever meet a kid who has no siblings? You know it immediately. Because the world goes from here to here, right? I'm looking at you, Ben. I'm looking at you, man. No, you're not like that at all. Because you have good parents, right? Last quote out of the book. And I think this may be one of the most important in understanding ourselves. Faithful lifestyle evangelism means seeing everything that makes you who you are as an avenue for the progress of the gospel. If you love art, for example, you are likely to be around people who love art. You speak their language, you understand their interests, you recognize their struggles. To you, it all may seem like second nature, but your particular knowledge and interest puts you in a relationship with people who would be hard-pressed to hear about their need for Jesus from anyone else. Share Jesus with the people where you live and love, and share Jesus with the people where your life and loves have placed you. See how important that is? What matters to you? What's important to you? Who are the people in your life that you just naturally speak to? Right? Jake and I love football. And we go to lunch with Deb all the time, and poor Deb hates football. It's not that she hates football. She just doesn't love football. She loves quilting. I don't know anything about quilting. So we're talking about football, and we turn to Deb. Now, thankfully, last week, Jake taught Deb how to have a football conversation with somebody. Right? And we let her practice that this last week. Right? But if she started talking about quilting, my eyes would glaze over. But there are people who would be captured and enraptured, who would understand the language that she's speaking. There are people in your life, and this is what I'm trying to drive home, that only you are going to be able to share the gospel with. Because they love the things that you love. Maybe you're a car person. Maybe you're a horse person. Maybe you're a gun person. Maybe you're a goat person. I don't know. Whatever it is that you are passionate about, that should help you be around people who are passionate about those things, and that is your cultural context to share the gospel. Number 3, you need to know yourself. You also need to know your audience. Who is it that you're speaking to? Pay attention to what's going on in people's lives. Here's kind of a high-level thing that you can understand, that you need to know right away, is what is the person who you're praying for and sharing the gospel with, what is their faith history and story? And you can just ask them, hey, did you grow up in church? And if you ask that question, you may get an earful. Yeah, I grew up in church and I hated every second of it, and all those church people are hypocrites. By the way, when someone says that, you can say, yo, preach it, brother. Preach it. We are all hypocrites. That's truth. And if they have a faith history, now you understand what your basis is for you speaking to that person. But if they have no faith history and they don't even know who Jesus is, well, now you got some work to do. That's a different kind of conversation, right? So not only do you need to know yourself, you need to know them, because as Paul said, I want to find common ground with everyone so that I can save some by sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ with them. What is the common ground you can find with people? If you don't have that common ground, you are not even at the place to begin sharing the gospel. Which is one of the reasons I cannot stand every time I leave a Bronco game and I'm walking down and out to the car and there's a guy standing on the lamppost sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ with complete and total strangers, and he looks like a nutcase. I understand what he's trying to do, but he has not earned the right to have that conversation with the people that are walking by. He hasn't built a relationship with anybody. So all it comes across as is he's better than we are. Instead of saying, what's going on in your life? Where are the hurts and the pains? Now, and the other thing is, he's usually not even wearing a Bronco outfit. You're not even trying to fit in to this culture where it's very simple to fit in, right? You go to a Bronco game, and it's against us and, say, the 49ers, and the only reason I bring up the 49ers is because they're playing today and the Broncos aren't, but I was at the game where we beat them this year. Got to take your wins where you can get them, okay? And it's very clear in that culture, right? If I'm wearing a Bronco uniform, you know what I stand for. Lately, that's losing, but you know what I stand for. And if you're in a 49er uniform, you know what they stand for. But here's the thing. We were at that 49er game, and there were like 4 of us together, actually a whole stadium together, of Bronco fans, and behind us were about 6 or 7, Jake? 49er fans? But 7 or 8 49er fans behind us, and they were obnoxious. I was delightful. They were obnoxious. And as the game went up, see, here's what happened. I was a Bronco fan, and I was going to be steadfast in my Bronco fandom. They were 49er fans, and they were steadfast in their 49er-dom. We didn't have any common ground. In fact, when the game was over, and I don't know if you know this, but we won just by the skin of our teeth, like right at the very end. And they were, before that, man, they were giving me all kinds of garbage about how our team stunk, and they're right, but I'm not going to take that, right? And at the game, after we won, I stood up and I said, "See ya, boys." Now, here's the thing. Was that a No, I'm not going to die because I got all my friends around me, right? In fact, one of the scariest moments in my life was at a Raider game when a Raider fan who'd been drinking too much started yelling, and a Bronco fan 5 rows ahead of him turned around and said, "Why don't you shut up?" And the Raider fan said, "Why don't you make me?" And the Bronco fan did. Right? Now the Bronco fan felt pretty confident because he's around all his boys. Right? And the best part of the whole story is the cops showed up and kicked the Raider fan out and left the Bronco fan. Okay? Now, here's what I want to tell you. He said, Pastor, why are you off on this rant? Here's why. Will you become a Raider fan or a 49er fan to share the gospel?
No.
That's what we're faced with. That's what we're faced with. Because I got to tell you, me and the 49er fans had no common ground. I was not going to share Jesus with these 49er fans in that moment. They wouldn't have listened to it. Because I'm the enemy. I'm not with them, I'm against them. And as Christians, we're already working from a deficit because most of our culture believes Christians are the enemy. So you got to find some common ground with people. Be a 49er fan. By the way, today I'm a huge Bengals fan. Get on their team to find common ground with them to share the gospel of Jesus Christ. That's what we're talking about. Find common ground with the people that you're around. Now, on the back of your sheet is your homework. Number one, you need to do some self-analysis of your cultural context, what makes you unique. You need to consider the cultural context of the person that you've been praying for. And I want you to find a way to serve the person that you want to share the gospel with this week and be praying for them. Now remember, several weeks ago, we said you need to have 3 people. I asked you to identify 3 people that you're going to be sharing the gospel with and praying for. And then we narrowed it down. Mike narrowed it down to 1 person. Now, here's what I know is true about everyone in this group. Either you have a name to write down there or you don't. If you do, great, fantastic. If you don't, I don't want you to panic. Anita and I had this conversation this week. Man, I don't know who my 3 people are. I'm wrestling with that. That's where you start then. What is the cultural context that you have where you can begin to build those relationships? If you don't have someone's name to write down, start there and begin asking God to put someone into your life whose name you can begin to write down on that list. Okay? But don't just say, well, I don't have a name, so I'm out. Good news, Pastor, I don't have to do my homework. Wrong. You got to get a person. All right, I am woefully late, but we're going to blame Tim and Danny for that. All right? Would you all stand? Let me pray for you. Go rescue your children. Have a great rest of your day. Father, we thank you for the gospel of Jesus Christ that has changed and transformed our lives and is waiting to change and transform the lives of the people we know, people we live with, work with, play with, and are just around on a consistent basis. Help us, Father, to understand the cultural context that we're sharing the gospel in, to understand how we can share the gospel with the people around us in their lives in ways that they'll understand, in ways that they'll be able to accept, and help us to serve the people around us today and over the course of this week. Father, keep us safe, give us a good day, give us a great week for your glory, and all God's people said, Amen. God bless you. Tim and Danny will be out in the lobby if you want to talk with them. And don't forget, stack it.